I'm Dustin Fowler, and in this video I want to talk to you guys about international migration. Today, international migrants make up about 3.5 to 4% of the world's population, and of that number, anywhere between 7 to 10 of them are going to be refugees, which is going to include the crisis that's going on in Syria right now, and as well as many other refugees from other locations in South Asia and Africa. Before I get too much into migration and the whys and wheres and all these good things, what I want to really do is talk with you about the difference between global north and global south. There are maps on the internet you could easily find that kind of demonstrate what this actually is doing, but what you see is oftentimes there is a line of latitude by which you can kind of denote the developed world in the north and the undeveloped, or LDCs, of the global south. And so when you talk about global north and global south, it's kind of a little bit politically incorrect and maybe even a little bit offensive because it's somewhat environmental determinist. I mean, it kind of implies that if you're in the northern mid-latitude regions, then you tend to be better off than people that are not in the northern mid-latitude regions. It also is not geographically accurate all the time, as some countries in what would be geographically the south, the southern hemisphere, such as Australia and New Zealand, would actually be considered global north, or that is very highly developed countries when it comes to these migration patterns. Typically, when we think in terms of global north and global south and migrations from place to place, we think of it in the terms of migration patterns from global south to global south, global south to global north to global north, and then the rarest of all different kinds of migration patterns will be global north into global south. And we're going to talk a little bit about why people do what they do in terms of their habits with international migration. Migrants from global south countries, they're in stage 2 countries of the demographic transition. These guys are looking for opportunities in urban settings. So they're going to big cities within their own country, which we're going to talk about in my next video, but they're also going to big cities in countries that may also be undeveloped but have better opportunities in the country that they are from. So a perfect example of this might be migrants from rural India that go over to Bangladesh and to the city of Dhaka in an effort to find some of these opportunities. Opportunities would include things like better education, more gender equality, perhaps the ability to take a job in manufacturing or some kind of other service career. Still, another issue that these migrants are going to suffer from is going to be something that you're going to see anyone from global south going anywhere else is going to often suffer from, and that is persecution or some degree of prejudice or bias against them. One example of this could be individuals that may go to the city of Dubai in the United Arab Emirates from places in Bangladesh. There was at one point from South Asia into Dubai a very large influx of migrants that once they got to Dubai, they were denied entry, their identifications were taken, and other atrocities, other brutal examples of mistreatment by Dubai authorities. So oftentimes you're going to see where these immigrants have to take a lot of heat when they go. So in that context, you got to understand that migrants are going to move really if it's way better opportunities for them to do so. Because moving is kind of hard to do. I mean, it's a big change, and change is uncomfortable. Probably the greatest example of global south to global south migration patterns we're going to see, especially ever since 2011, would involve refugees. Now, I say since 2011, this is when the Syrian civil war started and the refugee crisis that ensued became front and foremost in the news ever since about 2013, 2014. This is going to be something that's produced a huge load of refugees. So in short, international migrants go from global south stage 2 countries to other global south, maybe stage 2 or stage 3 countries, in an effort to either escape turmoil and conflict in their region or to seek better opportunities in their urban centers. Also see, though, in some cases where these people might have more ability to travel into more developed countries, where you're going to see global south migration and global north. And what this means is that you got people in North Africa, for example, trying to find opportunities in Europe, where the development levels are very, very high, and you have a demand to do jobs that maybe the people that are there don't want. The problems with this, though, are twofold. or maybe even more than that, but there are at least two big glaring issues, and one of them is the same issue we just discussed, and that is persecution against these people. They're considered to be more lowly than the indigenous populations. In other words, if you are someone who lives in Europe and is native to Europe, born and raised, and your family's been there for generations, well then you're probably well ingrained, and these migrant workers that come here to provide certain services or do some of the dirty work, if you will, are seen as less than the people that are already there. They might speak in a weird accent, have a weird culture or weird religion, or something that's not the norm in the region, and so they take a lot of flack for that. Another issue with this is that many of those jobs that these people go to take are extremely low wage jobs. They may be infinitely better opportunities than what these individuals had in the country they're from, but it still doesn't leave them a whole lot of room for upward mobility or progression in the economic ladder. Plus, a huge sum of the wages made are sent overseas back home as remittance. Global North countries, though, have always been big fans of brain drain. They're always looking for migrant workers that offer something that they can't easily get, like doctors and astrophysicists and techie individuals that make cell phones and things like this. So they're always looking for the best and brightest, which also causes a problem in these home countries. For example, in India, you might have an issue where many scientists want to come and stay in the United States because the United States offers way more opportunity for them to really advance in their career as opposed to going back home in places where they might not have as much opportunity. Another big form of international migration you're going to see is from global north to global north. This happens a lot as transnational corporations begin to expand. You have one company that wants to have a base of operations in other regions for economic gain. And so these places are going to send migrant workers from home countries in order to work or maybe even train other indigenous people in the countries where they're trying to establish bases that can run the show there. And so this expansion is going to lead from one global north to another global north country, and you see that migration a lot as companies expand. Because of the very nature of this type of economically driven migration, you can fairly well assume that this type of migration isn't going to be quite as permanent as the global south to global north or global south to global south kinds of migration. These guys are oftentimes going to go wherever the money takes them. So if they need to train groups of people in one area to do something, they might find themselves the next year or two training another group in another area on how to do something else. And finally, that takes us to the final form of international migration. That is people that move from global north developed countries into the global south. These people are gonna be those who have charity work in mind. They're gonna be the ones who are your Peace Corps or your people that go on mission trips or missionaries in general. They're gonna go from a highly developed country in order to promote a cause or try to help development by building schools or helping educate people about not having so many kids or whatever it might be. These are going to be individuals that really have their heart in the matter, and they're going to be moving for those reasons. And you can imagine that it's going to take a very, very good heart to do so. So therefore, since most people don't have that kind of a good heart, you're going to see very few people moving from global north to global south. This type of global south to global north migration that we talked about really only describes international migration. There's two different types of migration. International being one and interregional being another. In order to understand more about interregional migration, watch my next video where I tackle the topic of the migration transition, Wilbur Zielinski's pet project about how migration patterns also correlate with the demographic transition. Stay tuned. Thanks for watching.